Chapter 11 of The Recollections of Rifleman Harris, edited by Henry Curling. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Retreat to Corunna. The information McLauchlan obtained from Lieutenant Hill quickly spread amongst us, and we now began to see more clearly the horrors of our situation, and the men to murmur at not being permitted to turn and stand at bay, cursing the French, and swearing they would rather die 10,000 deaths, with their rifles in their hands in opposition, than endure the present toil. We were in the rear at this time, and following that part of the army which made for Vigo, whilst the other portion of the British, being on the main road to Corunna, were at this moment closely pursued and harassed by the enemy, as I should judge from the continued thunder of their cannon and rattle of their musketry. Craufurd seemed to sniff the sound of battle from afar with peculiar feelings. He halted us for a few minutes occasionally, when the distant clamour became more distinct, and his face turned towards the sound, and seemed to light up, and become less stern. It was then indeed that every poor fellow clutched his weapon more firmly, and wished for a sight of the enemy. Before long they had their wish. The enemy's cavalry were on our skirts that night, and as we rushed out of a small village, the name of which I cannot now recollect, we turned to bay. Behind broken down carts and tumbrils, huge trunks of trees, and everything we could scrape together, the rifles lay and blazed away at the advancing cavalry, whilst the inhabitants, suddenly aroused from their beds to behold their village almost on fire with our continued discharges, and nearly distracted with the sound, ran from their houses crying, "Viva la Inglesa!" and "Viva la Franca!" in a breath. Men, women, and children flying to the open country in their alarm. We passed the night thus engaged, holding our own as well as we could, together with the 43rd Light Infantry, the 52nd, a portion of the German Legion, part of the 10th Hussars, and the 15th Dragoons. Towards morning we moved down towards a small bridge, still followed by the enemy, whom, however, we had sharply galled, and obliged to be more wary in their efforts. The rain was pouring down in torrents on this morning, I recollect, and we remained many hours with our arms ported, standing in this manner, and staring the French cavalry in the face, the water actually running out of the muzzles of our rifles. I do not recollect seeing a single regiment of infantry amongst the French force on this day. It seemed to me a tremendous body of cavalry. Some said 9,000 or 10,000 strong, commanded, as I heard, by General Lefebvre. Whilst we stood thus, face to face, I remember the horsemen of the enemy sat watching us very intently, as if waiting for a favourable moment to dash upon us like beasts of prey; and every now and then their trumpets would ring out a lively strain of music, as if to encourage them. As the night drew on, our cavalry moved a little to the front, together with several field pieces, and succeeded in crossing the bridge; after which we also advanced, and threw ourselves into some hilly ground on either side of the road; whilst the 43rd and 52nd lay behind some carts, trunks of trees, and other materials with which they had formed a barrier. General Craufurd was standing behind this barricade, when he ordered the rifles to push still further in front, and conceal themselves amongst the hills on either side. A man named Higgins was my front rank man at this moment. "Harris," said he, "let you and I gain the very top of the mountain, and look out for what those French thieves are at on the other side." My feet were sore and bleeding, and the sinews of my legs ached as if they would burst, but I resolved to accompany him. In our wearied state the task was not easy, but, by the aid of Higgins, a tall and powerful fellow, I managed to reach the top of the mountain, where we placed ourselves in a sort of gully or ditch, and looked over to the enemy's side, concealing ourselves by lying flat in the ditch as we did so. Thus, in favourable situations, like cats watching for their prey, were the rest of the rifles lying perdu on the hills that night. The mountain, we found, was neither so steep nor so precipitous on the enemy's side. The ascent, on the contrary, was so easy that one or two of the vedettes of the French cavalry were prowling about very near where we lay. As we had received orders not to make more noise than we could help, not even to speak to each other except in whispers, although one of these horsemen approached close to where I lay, I forbore to fire upon him. At length he stopped so near me that I saw it was almost impossible he could avoid discovering that the rifles were in such close proximity to his person. He gazed cautiously along the ridge, took off his helmet, and wiped his face, as he appeared to meditate upon the propriety of crossing the ditch in which we lay, when suddenly our eyes met, and in an instant he plucked a pistol from his holster, fired it in my face, and wheeling his horse, plunged down the hillside. For the moment I thought I was hit, as the ball grazed my neck, and stuck fast in my knapsack, where I found it, when, many days afterwards, I unpacked my kit on shipboard. The ball I found in one of my shirts, and kept it long afterwards. About a quarter of an hour after this, as we still lay in the gully, I heard some person clambering up behind us, and upon turning quickly round, I found it was General Craufurd. The General was wrapped in his greatcoat, and like ourselves had been for many hours drenched to the skin, for the rain was coming down furiously. He carried in his hand a canteen full of rum, and a small cup, with which he was occasionally endeavouring to refresh some of the men. He offered me a drink as he passed, and then proceeded onwards along the ridge. After he had emptied his canteen, he came past us again, and himself gave us instructions as to our future proceedings. "When all is ready, Rifleman," said he, "you will immediately get the word, and pass over the bridge. Be careful, and mind what you are about." Accordingly, a short time after he had left us, we were ordered to descend the mountain side in a single line, and having gained the road, were quickly upon the bridge. Meanwhile the staff corps had been hard at work mining the very centre of the structure, which was filled with gunpowder, a narrow plank being all the aid we had by which to pass over. For my own part, I was now so utterly helpless that I felt as if all was nearly up with me, and that, if I could steady myself so as to reach the further end of the plank, it would be all I should be able to accomplish. However, we managed all of us to reach the other side in safety, when, almost immediately afterwards, the bridge blew up with a tremendous report, and the house at its extremity burst into flames. What with the concussion of the explosion, and the tremulous state of my limbs, I was thrown to the ground, and lay flat upon my face for some time, almost in a state of insensibility. After a while I somewhat recovered, but it was not without extreme difficulty, and many times falling again, that I succeeded in regaining the column. Soon after I had done so, we reached Benevento, and immediately took refuge in a convent. Already 3 parts of it were filled with other troops, among which were mingled the 10th Hussars, the German Legion, and the 15th Dragoons, the horses of these regiments standing as close as they could stand, with the men dismounted between each horse, the animals' heads to the walls of the building, and all in readiness to turn out on the instant. Liquor was handed to us by the Dragoons, but having had nothing for some time to eat, many of our men became sick instead of receiving any benefit from it. Before we had been in the convent as long a time as I have been describing our arrival, every man of us was down on the floor and well nigh asleep, and before we had slept half an hour we were again aroused from our slumbers by the clatter of the horses, the clash of the men's sabres, and their shouts for us to clear the way. "The enemy! The enemy!" I heard shouted out. "Clear the way, Rifles! Up, boys, and clear the way!" In short, the Dragoons hardly gave us time to rise, before they were leading their horses amongst us, and getting out of the convent as fast as they could scamper, whilst we ourselves were not long in following their example. As we did so, we discovered that the French cavalry, having found the bridge blown up, had dashed into the stream and succeeded in crossing. Our cavalry, however, quickly formed and charged them in gallant style. The shock of that encounter was tremendous to look upon, and we stood for some time enranked, watching the combatants. The horsemen had it all to themselves. Our dragoons fought like timers. It was said that Napoleon observed this encounter from the heights, and, although greatly overmatched, drove the enemy back like a torrent, and forced them again into the river. A private of the 10th Hussars, his name, I think, was Franklin, dashed into the stream after their general, Lefebvre, assailed him, sword in hand, in the water, captured, and brought him a prisoner on shore again. If I remember rightly, Franklin, or whatever else was his name, was made a sergeant on the spot. The French general was delivered into our custody on that occasion, and we cheered the 10th men heartily as we received him. After the enemy had received this check from our cavalry, and which considerably dampened their ardour, making them a trifle more shy of us for a while, we pushed onwards on our painful march. I remember marching close beside the French general during some part of this day, and observing his chapfallen and dejected look as he rode along in the midst of our green jackets. Being constantly in rear of the main body, the scenes of distress and misery I witnessed were dreadful to contemplate, particularly amongst the women and children, who were lagging and falling behind, their husbands and fathers being in the main body in our front. We now came to the edge of a deep ravine, the descent so steep and precipitous that it was impossible to keep our feet in getting down, and we were sometimes obliged to sit and slide along on our backs, whilst before us rose a ridge of mountains quite as steep and difficult of ascent. There was, however, no pause in our exertion, but, slinging our rifles round our necks, down the hill we went, whilst mules with the baggage on their backs, wearied and urged beyond their strength, were seen rolling from top to bottom, many of them breaking their necks with the fall, and the baggage crushed, smashed, and abandoned. I remember as I descended this hill, remarking the extraordinary sight offered by the thousands of our redcoats, who were creeping like snails, and toiling up the ascent before us, their muskets slung round their necks, and clambering with both hands as they hauled themselves up. As soon as we ourselves had gained the ascent, we were halted for a few minutes, in order to give us breath for another effort, and then onwards we moved again. It is impossible for me to keep any account of time in this description, as I never exactly knew how many days and nights we marched, but I well know we kept on for many successive days and nights, without rest, or much in the way of food. The long day found us still pushing on, and the night caused us no halt. After leaving the hills I have mentioned, and which I heard at the time were called the mountains of Galicia, as we passed through a village, our Major resolved to try and get us something in the shape of a better meal than we had been able hitherto to procure. He accordingly dispatched a small party, who were somewhat more fresh than their comrades, to try and procure something from the houses around, and they accordingly purchased, shot, and bayoneted somewhere about a score of pigs, which we lugged along with us to a convent just outside the town, and halting for a short time, proceeded to cook them. The men, however, were too hungry to wait whilst they were being properly dressed and served out. After this hasty meal we again pushed on, still cursing the enemy for not again showing themselves, that we might revenge some of our present miseries upon their heads. "Why don't they come on like men?" they cried, "whilst we've strength left in us to fight them?" We were now upon the mountains, the night was bitter cold, and the snow falling fast. As day broke, I remember hearing Lieutenant Hill say to another officer, who, by the way, afterwards sank down and died, "This is New Year's Day, and I think if we live to see another, we shall not easily forget it." The mountains were now becoming more wild-looking and steep as we proceeded, whilst those few huts we occasionally passed seemed so utterly forlorn and wretched-looking, it appeared quite a wonder how human beings could live in so desolate a home. After the snow commenced, the hills became so slippery, being in many parts covered with ice, that several of our men frequently slipped and fell, and, being unable to rise, gave themselves up to despair and died. There was now no endeavour to assist one another after a fall. It was every one for himself, and God for us all. The enemy, I should think, were at this time frequently close upon our trail, and I thought at times I heard their trumpets come down the wind as we marched. Towards the dusk of the evening of this day, I remember passing a man and woman, lying clasped in each other's arms, and dying in the snow. I knew them both, but it was impossible to help them. They belonged to the Rifles, and were man and wife. The man's name was Joseph Sitdown. During this retreat, as he had not been in good health previously, himself and wife had been allowed to get on in the best way they could in the front. They had, however, now given in, and the last we ever saw of poor Sitdown and his wife was on that night, lying perishing in each other's arms in the snow. End of Chapter 11.